njagala nnyo muve wano nga mutegedde lwaki tukuŋŋaana, lwaki abantu nga ffe twewaayo ne tugamba ekimala kimala. Bwe twasembayo okusinkana nabagamba nti abamu ku ffe twandibadde comfortable, abamu ku ffe twali tusobola okubeera mu bulamu obulungi olubeerera, abamu ku ffe twali tusobola okugenda e Bulaaya ne tubeera eyo, abamu ku ffe twali ba artist. Kansolo Nalukola abagambye nti Kongo y'ensi esinga mu nsi yonna obugagga, naye Abakongo be basinga obwavu mu nsi yonna. Lwaki? Kubanga abantu baabwe abaali.
Welcome ladies and gentlemen, hope you are doing well. If it is your first time to view this video, this is MIKEANN'S K254, and remember to subscribe, to like and share on this channel, even to comment. Today's news is one-on-one in Uganda. Uganda siku zinazidi kuchacha, mambo yanazidi kuchemka. Tukisubiri sana kuapishwa kwa Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Je, ataapishwa kweli? Trump amekataa kata. Watch, then I will come for more reaction.
One mother stripped of her dignity in the sanctuary of her home, one opposition leader encircled by the cold steel of brand new rifles, and one dark command that severed the digital pulse of 45 million souls. This is no longer a mere election. This is the staggering collapse of a decade-long facade. As a heavy orchestrated silence falls over the hills of Kampala, the world has finally broken its own. From the hallowed halls of the United Nations to the resolute desk of Donald Trump, a final, unyielding ultimatum has been delivered: the era of rule by fear must meet its end. This is the moment where sovereignty is reclaimed from the grip of a dynasty and restored to the hands of the people. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. Subscribe to Rising Africa Rising Hero to stand with the truth and the future of a continent. The clock struck midnight on the 15th of January 2026, but for the residents of Magere, the darkness brought something far more sinister than the arrival of a new day. In the shadows of a nation already suffocating under a state-mandated digital blackout, the silence was shattered by the rhythmic heavy thud of military boots and the violent splintering of wood. These were not the sounds of a standard security patrol. They were the echoes of a targeted assault on the very heart of the Ugandan opposition. At the residence of Robert Kyagulanyi, the man known to the world as Bobby Wine, the sanctity of the home was breached by a swarm of men. They arrived with the precision of a strike team and the lawless aggression of a mob. Barbie Itungo, a woman whose grace has often stood as a pillar of strength for the movement, found herself facing a nightmare that no mother or wife should ever endure. As the doors were smashed open with heavy hammers, a wave of soldiers in SFC uniforms, regular UPDF fatigues, and menacing plain clothes flooded the hallways. They were tall, muscular, and moved with a haunting uniformity, as if selected from a single mold, or as some witnesses noted, a single tribe. Many appeared to be under the influence of more than just orders. Their breath stinking of alcohol, their eyes glazed with a dangerous drug-induced detachment. They did not come to arrest. They came to dismantle. With the cold efficiency of those who believe they are above the law, they began a systematic looting of the household's digital memory. They grabbed chargers, power banks, and laptops. They ripped CCTV controllers from the walls and tore down Wi-Fi routers, ensuring that no record of their brutality could escape the perimeter of the compound. In the eyes of the regime, a crime that is not recorded is a crime that never happened. They searched every corner from the living room to the ceiling crawl spaces, turning a family home into a chaotic crime scene. The horror reached its zenith when these armed men turned their attention to Barbie herself. In a calculated attempt to break the spirit of the opposition, they subjected her to a level of degradation that defies the very concept of human rights. They strangled her, their calloused hands tightening around her throat as they demanded the passwords to her private devices. When she refused, standing firm in her dignity, even as the cold metal of a gun barrel was pressed against her, they resorted to psychological warfare. They forcefully removed her blouse, mocking her, and took photographs of her in her most vulnerable state. It was a deliberate attempt to use shame as a weapon, a tactic designed to humiliate not just a woman, but the entire struggle for freedom she represents. As the soldiers ransacked the house, they mocked her marriage, hurling ethnic insults and questioning why she would dare to challenge the authority of the man who has ruled Uganda for 4 decades. They beat the household staff and the security guards, treating every human being within those walls as an enemy of the state. Outside, the world was oblivious, blinded by the internet blackout that the government had imposed to veil its actions. But inside that house, amidst the smell of sweat and the sound of breaking glass, the true nature of the regime was laid bare. This was not an act of national security. It was an act of raw, unadulterated intimidation. The soldiers moved like a shadow cabinet of destruction, leaving behind a trail of physical and psychological trauma that would linger long after the sun rose. Barbie Yetungo was eventually rushed to the hospital, her body bruised and her mind reeling from the assault, but her spirit, much like the spirit of the movement, remained remarkably unbowed. The regime thought that by seizing the cameras and the phones, they could seize the narrative. They believed that by silencing one house, they could silence a nation. However, every blow struck with a hammer and every insult hurled in that midnight raid acted as a spark. They did not realize that the very tools they used to suppress the truth, the chains of fear and the shroud of darkness, were the very things that would eventually bind the international community together in a rare moment of unanimous condemnation. The signature of the dictator was written in the bruises on a woman's neck and the broken glass on a nursery floor. The raid at MIKEANN'S was intended to be the final nail in the coffin of the opposition, but as the first reports began to trickle out through the cracks in the blackout, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. But as the sun climbed over the horizon of a bruised Kampala, a question hung in the air. How long can a throne rest upon the broken doors of its citizens before the weight of the world brings it crashing down? To understand the shattered glass in MIKEANN'S, one must look beyond the immediate violence and into the cold, calculated heart of the Museveni dictatorship. For 40 years, the narrative of Uganda has been written by a single hand. A hand that once promised a fundamental change, but eventually grew to resemble the very tyranny it sought to replace. What the world witnessed on the night of the raid was the inevitable evolution of a regime that has traded its revolutionary legitimacy for the hollow security of a family estate. The transition from a liberation movement to a hereditary autocracy is no longer a whispered theory in the corridors of Kampala. It is a visible, violent reality that now threatens the stability of the entire Great Lakes region. At the center of this tightening grip is the systematic elevation of the first family over the institutions of the state. The rise of General Muhoozi, the president's son, has transformed the Ugandan People's Defense Forces from a national army into a private Praetorian Guard. When soldiers stormed the home of the opposition, they did so not under the banner of the Constitution, but under the shadow of a dynasty. This is the hallmark of the Museveni dictatorship. The blurring of the line between the state's treasury and the family's wallet, between the national interest and the survival of a bloodline. The military, once respected for its discipline, is now frequently deployed as a tool of domestic terror, used to prune the political landscape of any flower that dares to bloom without the regime's permission. For the older generation of Americans, particularly within the African American community, these images of state-sponsored brutality evoke a haunting sense of déjà vu. There is a profound, painful resonance between the scenes in MIKEANN'S and the struggle for civil rights in the American South during the 1960s. To those who marched from Selma to Montgomery, who stood against the fire hoses and the attack dogs of an entrenched white supremacy, the sight of Ugandans being beaten for the simple act of demanding a fair vote is a mirror of their own history. They recognize the scent of a dying regime that uses the baton because it has lost the argument. The struggle for the ballot box in Uganda is not a distant foreign concept. It is the same universal quest for dignity that defined the American 20th century. The economic cost of this authoritarianism is staggering. Under the Museveni dictatorship, the vibrant potential of Uganda's youth, one of the youngest populations on Earth, is being sacrificed to maintain the status quo. Billions of dollars in international aid, much of it provided by the hardworking taxpayers of the West, have been diverted into an opaque security apparatus designed to keep one family in power. When a grandmother in Chicago or a retiree in Atlanta looks at their tax bill, they are increasingly asking why their money is being used to fuel the vehicles and buy the ammunition that silences peaceful protesters in Kampala. The partnership between the United States and Uganda, once built on the pillars of regional security and health initiatives, is now being poisoned by the corruption of a leadership that views its citizens as subjects rather than stakeholders. The regime's reliance on the midnight raid and the internet blackout reveals a fundamental weakness. A leader who is truly loved by his people does not need to cut the cables of communication to stay in power. A government that serves the public does not need to hide its face in the dark of night. By plunging 45 million people into digital isolation, Museveni did more than just stop the flow of information. He admitted to the world that his power can only survive in a vacuum. He has created a state where the signature of the president carries more weight than the law of the land, and where a secret document in a general's safe is more powerful than the collective will of the voters. However, the architects of this oppression have overlooked a crucial lesson of history. The more a spring is compressed, the more violently it eventually recoils. The Museveni dictatorship has spent decades perfecting the art of survival through division-playing ethnic groups against one another, and using the specter of past instability to justify current tyranny. But today, a new generation has emerged, a generation that does not remember the wars of the 80s. A generation that is connected, hungry for opportunity, and unimpressed by the medals on a general's chest. They are not looking for a liberator. They are looking for a leader who is accountable to the law. As the smoke cleared from the raid, it became evident that the regime had crossed a Rubicon. By attacking the family of his chief rival Museveni, has removed the last vestiges of political civility. He has signaled that no one is safe, no home is a sanctuary, and no law is sacred. But in doing so, he has also signaled his own desperation. Liệu những nòng súng mua bằng tiền viện trợ quốc tế có thể giữ cho ngai vàng đứng vững khi Washington bắt đầu đặt câu hỏi? The silence of the internet blackout in Kampala did not mean the world was not watching. In fact, it only amplified the frequency of the alarms ringing in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. As the images of the brutalized Itungo family and the reports of mass arrests began to bypass the regime's firewalls, the reaction from the United States was swift, bipartisan, and unprecedented. For years, the relationship between the two nations had been a delicate dance of security cooperation and quiet finger-wagging. But the events of January 2026 have triggered a seismic shift, culminating in a clear and formidable Trump warning Uganda. On the floor of the United States Senate, the rhetoric has moved beyond diplomatic concern into the realm of actionable consequences. Senator Jean Shaheen and Senator Cory Booker, representing a powerful bipartisan front, released a joint statement that sent shockwaves through the Ugandan Ministry of Defense. They didn't just condemn the violence. They targeted the very lifeblood of the regime's power, U.S. security assistance. For the American taxpayer especially, the elder generation who remembers the hard-won battles for democratic integrity, there is a growing refusal to subsidize a military that turns its bayonets on its own people. The message from the Senate was crystal clear. If the Ugandan authorities continue to treat the opposition as enemy combatants, the flow of American dollars, equipment, and training will be severed. However, it is the specific Trump warning Uganda that has the inner circle of the presidency in Kampala most unnerved. Known for a foreign policy that prioritizes strength and tangible outcomes over abstract diplomacy, the Trump administration has signaled that it is prepared to move past the era of strategic patience. The White House, working in tandem with a reshaped State Department, is now reviewing the application of the Global Magnitsky Act. This isn't just a threat to the nation's economy, it is a direct threat to the personal fortunes and travel privileges of the generals who authorized the raid at Mugere. The warning is specific: those who signed the orders to assault a woman in her home and those who commanded the kidnapping of political activists will find their international assets frozen and their names etched onto a global blacklist. This shift in American policy is not happening in a vacuum. It is a reflection of a deeper frustration with a leadership that takes billions in health and security aid while simultaneously undermining the democratic principles that the U.S. seeks to foster. The Trump administration's stance represents a deal-breaking moment. The warning suggests that if Museveni cannot guarantee the safety of figures like Bobi Wine, Dr. Kizza Besigye, and Dr. Sarah Barati, then Uganda is no longer a partner but a liability. For the generals in Kampala, who have long relied on their status as regional stabilizers to excuse their domestic tyranny, the floor is beginning to give way. The Trump warning strips away the shield of strategic importance, making it clear that no amount of counterterrorism cooperation can buy a permanent hall pass for human rights abuses. For the American public, particularly the African American community over the age of 60, this is a moment of profound accountability. They understand that foreign policy is not just about maps and treaties. It is about the values we export and the people we empower. There is a sense of pride in seeing the U.S. government finally draw a hard line against a leader who has overstayed his welcome by 3 decades. They see the Trump warning Uganda as a necessary intervention to prevent another African nation from sliding into the abyss of total state failure. It is an assertion that the dignity of a Ugandan citizen is worth as much as the dignity of any other, and that the stinky breath of drunken soldiers in a private home will not be ignored by the leader of the free world. The tension in Kampala is now palpable. The regime is caught between its instinct for total control and the terrifying reality of international isolation. When the U.S. Senate calls for the immediate release of political prisoners and the restoration of civil society permits, they are not making suggestions. They are setting the stage for a total reevaluation of the bilateral relationship. The signature of the American president, once a symbol of partnership, now hangs over the Museveni administration like a sword of Damocles. The question is no longer if the international community will act, but how far they are willing to go to enforce the Trump warning. As the financial and diplomatic walls close in, the architects of the Museveni dictatorship must decide if their loyalty to a dying dynasty is worth the personal and national ruin that now stares them in the face. When the purse strings of the world's superpower are tied shut, the heavy doors of a dictatorship often find they no longer have the hinges to stay closed. Khi ví tiền của chế độ bị đe dọa, lòng trung thành của quân đội sẽ kéo dài được bao lâu? While the warnings from Washington carry the weight of economic and military consequences, the broader international community has begun to weave a tight diplomatic net around the Museveni dictatorship. From the headquarters of the United Nations in New York to the European Union's diplomatic service in Brussels, the condemnation has moved beyond mere rhetoric. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, has broken with the usual cautious neutrality to issue a stern reminder to Kampala: the right to peaceful assembly and the safety of political actors are not optional. In the cold, precise language of international law, the UN has underscored that the events following the January elections are being monitored as potential breaches of treaty obligations that Uganda has signed and ratified. The European Union has been even more explicit. Their diplomatic mission has called for an immediate and independent investigation into the pre- and post-electoral violence, specifically naming the threats against Bobi Wine. By demanding that the authorities ensure the safety of all political actors, the EU is effectively serving notice that the preferential trade agreements and development partnerships that Uganda enjoys are contingent upon the restoration of the rule of law. For the average Ugandan, this international attention is a torch in a dark room. For the regime, it is a spotlight on a crime scene. Amidst this global outcry, the legal battle has moved into the international courts and the offices of high-powered global advocates. Robert Amsterdam, the renowned international lawyer representing Bobi Wine, has filed urgent warnings with the United Nations. His firm's statement is chilling. The threats made by General Muhoozi Kainerugaba are not mere political posturing. They are operational risks. Amsterdam argues that under international law, when a senior military commander who happens to be the president's son threatens an opponent, it constitutes a state-sanctioned green light for violence. This legal framing is crucial. It moves the responsibility from the individual soldier to the very top of the command structure, placing the burden of Bobi Wine's safety squarely on President Museveni himself. For those who value justice, these movements represent the tightening of a global accountability mechanism. The world is no longer willing to accept the excuse of internal affairs when a mother is assaulted and an entire population is silenced. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, are being invoked not just as documents, but as shields. The message is unanimous. The era where a leader could hide behind a border to commit atrocities is over. The digital age, despite the blackout, has ensured that the top-secret atrocities of the night are the headlines of the morning. The international community has effectively issued a yellow card to the Ugandan government. But as the legal filings pile up and the diplomatic cables grow increasingly sharp, the path for the regime is narrowing. They are finding that while they can control the streets of Kampala with hammers and boots, they cannot control the halls of justice in Geneva or The Hague. Các tổ chức quốc tế đã rút ra thẻ vàng, nhưng ai sẽ là người rút they do cuối cùng? The road ahead for Uganda is no longer paved with the predictable stones of a 40-year status quo. It is a path through a storm, but one that leads toward a horizon of reclaimed dignity. Despite the bruises and the broken doors, the message echoing from Magere to the furthest corners of the country is one of unyielding hope. The people of Uganda, particularly the youth who make up the vast majority of the population, are no longer asking for permission to be free. They are demonstrating that true sovereignty does not reside in the palace of a president or the barrel of a general's gun. It resides in the collective will of a citizenry that refuses to be intimidated. In the coming months, the world will witness a critical test of endurance. The Museveni dictatorship faces a choice that will define its final chapter. It can continue to double down on repression, risking total international pariah status and economic collapse. Or it can begin the painful but necessary process of opening the political space. The pressure from the Trump warning Uganda and the scrutiny of the United Nations have created a rare moment of leverage. For the first time in decades, the regime's internal survival is directly tied to its external conduct. This is the turning point history will remember, where the cost of tyranny has finally become higher than the cost of reform. For the international community, and especially for the Friends of Africa in the West, the task is to stay the course. The partnership of the future must be one of partnership, not pity. It must be a commitment to stand with the institutions of democracy, the courts, the journalists, and the civil society organizations rather than the individuals who seek to bypass them. The light of transparency is the only antidote to the top-secret violence of the night. By keeping the spotlight on Kampala, we ensure that the sacrifices of women like Barbie Atungo and leaders like Bobi Wine are not in vain. The story of Uganda is a mirror to the global struggle for justice. It reminds us that freedom is never a finished product. It is a constant labor of the hands. As the internet returns and the voices of the people grow louder, the vision of a free, prosperous, and dignified Uganda becomes more than a dream. It becomes an inevitability. The chains of the past are heavy, but they are rusting, and the calloused hands of the workers and the dreamers are ready to pull them down. We are watching the rebirth of a nation that has decided its future belongs to its children, not its masters. The path is long, and the obstacles remain formidable, but the direction is clear. The era of the big man is fading, and the era of the citizen is beginning to dawn. In the final analysis, the story of Uganda is not merely a chronicle of a Museveni dictatorship clinging to the remnants of its power. It is a testament to the indestructible nature of the human spirit. We have seen the darkness of the midnight raid, the shattered glass of a family home, and the stinky breath of tyranny. But we have also seen the resilience of a mother who refused to break the courage.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying with me. If it is the first time to view this video, this is MIKEANN'S K254. And today's video is that Yoweri Kaguta Museveni ajipata matatani kwa uchaguzi uliofanyika. Not only Museveni, but also his son, Muhoozi. Muhoozi is a general and is the son of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who is leading for the 40 years for now. Na anasema ya kwamba juzi tuliona akizungumza akisema ya kwamba yeye hata banduka na atakapo banduka ataachia mwanawe hicho kiti cha urais. Lakini je, litawezekana hilo? Halitawezekana. Ni kwa nini? Ni kwa sababu Trump ameweka macho wazi, na as we are talking now, Trump amempea only 24 hours. Na hizo 24 hours zitakapo kamilika, what will happen in Uganda? Kwa sababu tunaona ya kwamba Museveni amekaa ngumu, anasema ya kwamba watu wanampenda, watu walimchagua, watu waliona uzuri wake na ndikosa akaweza kuchaguliwa. But ukiangalia behind the curtain, watu wanaumia, watu wanateseka, watu wanasononeka, watu wanalia kila kukicha. Na Bobi Wine for real up to now hatujui yuko wapi, hatujui kama kweli yuko salama ama hayupo salama. So unaona vitu kama hizo zinasababishia Museveni kuwa kwa njia panda, kwa sababu hajui ni kipi hasa Trump amepanga. Because Trump kufika Uganda is not a big deal, by the way. Acha tunaeleze ukweli. Hiyo si big deal kwake. Yeye ni kupeana tu orders, then anafika Uganda. So before ifike hapo, je, wewe unaona Trump Museveni ataweza kuapishwa kweli? Kwa sababu nilisikia ikisemwa kwamba anaweza apishwa maybe tarehe 7 ama 8, ambapo imekaa for real, na kuapishwa kwake kulikuwa na yale machafuko na furugu zilizokuwa pale, ndizo zilisababisha Museveni akose kuapishwa, na sijui kama ataapishwa because, na tukirudi kwa nchi jirani tunaona ya kwamba Tanzania ilibidi Suluhu Samia aende apishwe kwenye kampi la jeshi, unaona. So vitu kama hizo, by the way, you are doing that thing because hauna that freedom, hauna that power, hauna nini. Ni kwa sababu unajua kwamba kitu ambacho umekifanya si kitu halali, ama is not good for the people of Uganda, for the people of Tanzania. Na this time is in Uganda, whereby we don't know if it will happen by Museveni to rule Uganda this year, for the next 5 years, because things the way zinaenda for real, nataka nikwambie tu kwamba things zinaenda kwa ubaya, na mambo yanazidi tu kuchemka, mambo yanazidi kuchafuka, kwa sababu Muhoozi naye amesema kwamba hatarudi nyuma, lazima apiganie kuhakikisha kwamba babake ameongoza. Na ukiangalia Bobi Wine anasema ya kwamba yeye hatarudi nyuma, pia atasukuma kuhakikisha kwamba Museveni ameweza kujingatua. Naweza sema tu ya kwamba fahali wawili wanapopigana nyazi ndio huumia, na hapa fahali ni wawili hao ambao ni Bobi Wine, Museveni na mwanawe Muhoozi. Na nyazi ambazo nazungumzia ni wale raia ambao wako kwa ground, na wale watu wa Uganda ambao wako kwa ground, whereby hao ndio wanaumia, wanakosa lishe, wanakosa matibabu, wanakosa vitu vingi kwa hakika, ambapo dunia ama taifa likiwa kwenye mgawanyiko wa vita, kuna vitu vingi ambavyo vinakosekana. But Trump naye amekataa, amesema ya kwamba anampa tu masaa 24 akuwa amejiasilimisha kwa ICC. Je, litawezekana hilo, ama ni kelele za chura tu, haziwezi mtisha tembo kunywa maji? Kwa sababu Museveni naye amesema ya kwamba yeye hakujichagua bali alichaguliwa na watu. Ni kweli kweli? Naweza sema kweli. Je, unaona kwamba Museveni aliweza kuchaguliwa na watu ama kajichagua mwenyewe? Give me your answer on comment section, kama unafikiri kwa mtazamo wako kama Museveni kajichagua mwenyewe. Kisha Trump amezungumza na Muhoozi, ameweza kuzungumza na Bobi Wine akimweleza ya kwamba asijali, whereby kuna kitu kinaweza fanyika. So as we are talking now, something can happen in Uganda, whereby Museveni asipochunga huu mwaka, kwa hakika kuapishwa kwake huenda kukawa kwa shida sana, na huenda hata kukashindikana. Lakini hata hivyo, naweza sema to continue praying for Uganda. Is our people, is our Africans people, we love them, so continue praying for that country. Thank you, may God bless you. If it is the first time to view this video, remember to subscribe on this channel. Thank you, may God bless you so much as you are doing so. Silent a moment for you to subscribe. Okay, thank you so much. May God bless you so much. Until we meet again on another video.
Own desperation. Liệu những nòng súng mua bằng tiền viện trợ quốc tế có thể giữ cho ngai vàng đứng vững khi Washington bắt đầu đặt câu hỏi? The silence of the internet blackout in Kampala did not mean the world was not watching. In fact, it only amplified the frequency of the alarms ringing in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. As the images of the brutalized Itungo family and the reports of mass arrests began to bypass the regime's firewalls, the reaction from the United States was swift, bipartisan, and unprecedented. For years, the relationship between the two nations had been a delicate dance of security cooperation and quiet finger-wagging. But the events of January 2026 have triggered a seismic shift, culminating in a clear and formidable Trump warning Uganda. On the floor of the United States Senate, the rhetoric has moved beyond diplomatic concern into the realm of actionable consequences. Senator Jean Shaheen and Senator Cory Booker, representing a powerful bipartisan front, released a joint statement that sent shockwaves through the Ugandan Ministry of Defense. They didn't just condemn the violence. They targeted the very lifeblood of the regime's power, U.S. security assistance. For the American taxpayer especially, the elder generation who remembers the hard-won battles for democratic integrity, there is a growing refusal to subsidize a military that turns its bayonets on its own people. The message from the Senate was crystal clear. If the Ugandan authorities continue to treat the opposition as enemy combatants, the flow of American dollars, equipment, and training will be severed. However, it is the specific Trump warning Uganda that has the inner circle of the presidency in Kampala most unnerved. Known for a foreign policy that prioritizes strength and tangible outcomes over abstract diplomacy, the Trump administration has signaled that it is prepared to move past the era of strategic patience. The White House, working in tandem with a reshaped State Department, is now reviewing the application of the Global Magnitsky Act. This isn't just a threat to the nation's economy. It is a direct threat to the personal fortunes and travel privileges of the generals who authorized the raid at Mugere. The warning is specific: those who signed the orders to assault a woman in her home and those who commanded the kidnapping of political activists will find their international assets frozen and their names etched onto a global blacklist. This shift in American policy is not happening in a vacuum. It is a reflection of a deeper frustration with a leadership that takes billions in health and security aid while simultaneously undermining the democratic principles that the U.S. seeks to foster. The Trump administration's stance represents a deal-breaking moment. The warning suggests that if Museveni cannot guarantee the safety of figures like Bobi Wine, Dr. Kizza Besigye, and Dr. Sarah Barati, then Uganda is no longer a partner but a liability. For the generals in Kampala, who have long relied on their status as regional stabilizers to excuse their domestic tyranny, the floor is beginning to give way. The Trump warning strips away the shield of strategic importance, making it clear that no amount of counterterrorism cooperation can buy a permanent hall pass for human rights abuses. For the American public, particularly the African American community over the age of 60, this is a moment of profound accountability. They understand that foreign policy is not just about maps and treaties. It is about the values we export and the people we empower. There is a sense of pride in seeing the U.S. government finally draw a hard line against a leader who has overstayed his welcome by 3 decades. They see the Trump warning Uganda as a necessary intervention to prevent another African nation from sliding into the abyss of total state failure. It is an assertion that the dignity of